Our next speaker will be Professor Tenenbaum, who will represent France, but if you would like to relate to EU, I mean, during the current simulation, you are invited as well.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll try to stick to the 10 minutes time you've encouraged us to respect. And I won't comment on the fact that you put France only within the European Union, but because France is used to present itself by herself and not through the European Union, but that's fine for this time. So first of all, I'd like to thank you very much, and in the name of Sciences Po and the Center for International Studies, the CERI, as a partner to the simulation event, and to express gratitude to IDC and Professor Harriman, to Professor Mintz and Hoffman, to you, Professor Charles Schei, and of course to the organizing committee here at IDC. People I already know, Leslie Terrace, for example, Esther Lopatien, but also, of course, Ciel Wiesman and Noga Halevi, who have spent their time chasing us around the campus these past days. So I read in the Jerusalem Post this morning an article by Yossi Melman saying that there were false or premature rumors about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi having been killed. And suddenly I knew where the rumors were coming from. It was from our simulation, actually. So people coming to IDC and not realizing this was actually a simulation. So he was ending his article by saying that however Baghdadi is living on borrowed time, the caliphate understands that its territorial control is ending. And however, no one should deceive themselves that the idea itself, jihad against the Christian West and all infidels, will disappear from the world. So that was quite actually an interesting point of view. So let me say a few words about the simulation and what type of questions we can ask such exercise, what type of objective we can relate to such an exercise before touching upon the more fundamental issues that can be related to France's position or to the European Union strategies on these issues. First of all, also as academics, I mean, simulations, exercises, training through simulation is one of the, if not the most widely used tool in terms of training policymakers, advisors, diplomats, NGOs, but also, and of course, the military. All part of this type of exercise comes directly from the military use of war games. And it's only recently that we have engaged in training diplomats through this kind of simulation, but also using the expression peace games also more recently. And actually it comes directly to us from the 60s, I think, and from the habit to try to forecast policy making in terms of foreign affairs. France only had a forecasting unit, a prospective department, since 1972. And I think the US just after the Second World War, between 45 and 50, something like this. And also, in terms of conflict resolution field, there was this initiatives launched in 1964-65 of so-called problem-solving workshops, trying to have close advisors to high-level policymakers in the same room for a few days and allowing them to talk to each other and maybe to envisage what could be an agreement or a negotiation or some sort of shared view on their own conflict. So what kind of simple questions we could ask to the simulation exercise? I think first, who is preparing actually and organizing the simulation? That is quite interesting, the fact that it is here at IDC and also who actually plays the simulation game. The fact that we are academics and experts and maybe other actors say something about what we can do also with that type of simulation. Then what is the content of simulation? The instructions, the rule of the games, are the participants allowed, as we were, to be creative with only a few words about our general strategy? Or are they given very specific instructions with confidential also instructions that other parties are not aware of, for example, which was not the case? And finally, what is the final purpose of our exercise here? The objective of the simulation. Was it for teaching purpose? Was it for research, for training, for trying to forecast what might happen in the region, for example? And what about the usefulness, the utility of such an exercise? It's usually related with expertise, but what can we learn in terms of diplomatic practice in terms of research, teaching, policy making, decision making. So now allow me a few questions on some elements for thoughts on the format of the simulations and simulations in general. Do simulations, first and foremost, remain simulations? What happens when the reality comes in line with the simulations? When it confirms what people have played in terms of role in the simulations? Do actors play what they have? Do they play according to the scenario that they have already prepared in previous simulations, for example, or do they decide to engage in a very different way of acting? Then the emergence or the development of kind of training culture. You know, who are the trainers, for example? I remember an example from a trainer who used to train the Palestinian negotiating team here. He said, you know, the Israelis know very well how to negotiate. Now we need to train the Palestinians too. So let's bring the Palestinians to Geneva, to UNITAR, and offer them lessons in negotiations, because they need to have some elements in order to be able to confront the Israelis around the table of negotiations. And this become actually kind of, if not simulation, a kind of diplomatic game also. But it also implies that you have people that are trying to play with the same kind of rules in terms of negotiation. And also having people that are already very familiar with the theory and practice of simulation. We all had already engaged before that in simulations of international crisis. And if you were going around the room on Tuesday, I believe close to every participant had not only something to say about his own position or the country he was representing, but also has had something to say about the simulation itself. It was not realistic enough or too realistic. It was frightening. It should have been done this way. The level of complexity. Is it close to reality or not enough close to reality? And is it useful? Is it risky? Is it reliable, etc.? All these questions that people ask when they do simulations, which illustrates how they not only think of as how they play their own role, but how the game itself is formed and how they might have done it differently, for example. Then what influence do we have as scholars on the practitioners when we do these simulations? I mean, as academics, we always think, well, this might be the way how practitioners, how diplomats are going to act in real life, so how could we, in a certain way, have some impact on them or maybe advise them in a certain way? Then on the fact that this is very much an illustration of the professionalization of the negotiating practice. The fact that everyone tries to become an expert on negotiation. And Oren, I think, very much illustrated that. We are in a period where we try to simulate, and not only to simulate, but to compute, to use computer to simulate decision making. And this says a lot of the field also of international relations and diplomatic practice, using simulations to become better trained at negotiation. And also a very traditional question about expert knowledge versus amateurishness. Do we need experts? What are these diplomats that have been trained for years, that have very precise knowledge of how negotiations should be conducted? What about the contradiction between putting the accent on individual relationships? Some types of improvisation. If you look at history of negotiations, this is an interesting debate. Now we have a roadmap. We have a model of the negotiations and of the different possible outcomes. It says a lot about the risks foreign affairs policymakers are ready to take or not, actually, forecasting role players. So questions raised on fundamental issues for international relations scholars, and also that on issues that might very well be challenges for France and European Union diplomatic strategy. First of all, how to engage in serious interactions with fragile, collapsing, or already collapsed states, and also non-state groups. This was the issue on Kurds and potential, Kurdistan. Yes, I have 2 minutes and then it's finished. And also in the Kurds in Syria and in Iraq. How to adapt the national position or bilateral strategy to an internationalized conflict, where insiders that have their own plan are backed by a series of international powers with their own competing and overlapping agendas. For example, France confronted to USA, Russia coalition, or France and within European Union, being actually quite isolated in terms of its military and diplomatic strategy in the region. and looking for support. How to better deal with a humanitarian crisis that scale, and how to include it in the traditional diplomatic negotiation environment. Then the war on terrorism, and more especially how to wage a war here and there, and what is to be used on the internal stage and on the external one, and how to adapt the military and the diplomatic apparatus to such volatile threats when nothing allows to say that achieving a deal on the international stage will signify the end of local violence. France is actually militarily involved, has boots on the ground in the region, and has increased its military involvement after the November attacks in Paris, on its ground, actually, on its territory. And that's my conclusion. Then also how to better integrate the religious dimension and the influence of religious actors in war and peace. This is something we haven't really touched upon, I think. So as a conclusion, what about all this relates to our reflection on global order and world system stability, the complexities of contemporary negotiation situation, multilateral, multi-level, and also what we touched upon yesterday was very interesting, an intervention on connective dissonance in international negotiations. The role of the media, we didn't have the media around us, the social media, you know, and there's something very interesting to talk about in this issue too. And finally, the implementation of a diversity of actors from private, public, state, and non-state actors. As a last word, I think these complex interactions through simulations implied at least a shared element of rationalities and common values. And this is something that remains a very gray area for me in that simulations. And finally, I think that some things cannot really be simulated or forecast. Take the example of France making 2 goals at the very last minutes of the football match yesterday evening. How could you have forecasted such an event? So thank you very much.